So good afternoon. Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon to learn a little bit more about the Middle Tennessee Region's Emissions Reduction Plan. My name is Jessica Hill, and I am the Director of Community and Regional Planning with the Greater Nashville Regional Council, and we are the lead agency for the Nashville MSA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which was funded through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency with approximately under the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a two-phase program which provided over 250 million for non-competitive planning grants and anticipates to award approximately 4.6 billion for competitive implementation grants. And we can speak about that in a little bit, but also we are one of three entities that is planning for emissions reductions in the state of Tennessee. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, TDEC, is leading the statewide emissions reduction plan called TVERS, and the Knoxville and Memphis MSAs were also recipients of the CPRG, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Planning Grants. So with that, I will get kicked off, and we will be using Poll EV. So if you are able to open up a new browser or tab on your window and pull up Poll EV, or you can text also as well with your smart device. So moving on, so just a quick introduction of our presenters today. I've introduced myself, but I will pause and let Maddie introduce herself as well.
Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. I am Maddie Bowles. I'm one of two environmental planners at GNRC, and I'm really excited to share with you all what we've been working on and hear from you guys and your feedback.
Great, thanks, Maddie. So jumping in, just to provide an overview, many of you may be familiar with the Greater Nashville Regional Council, but we are one of 9 development districts in the state of Tennessee, and we are primarily formed to serve as a convener and collaborator across what we call Middle Tennessee, so from the river districts of Stewart, Houston, and Humphreys, all the way over to our east boundary with Wilson and Trousdale, and then northern into the Kentucky line and south to Murray County. Now, for the CPRG, EPA's planning grant was awarded at an MSA level. So it does change that geography just a bit for us. So the map in front of you is the planning region that we are looking doing. And so as you can see, it includes the 13 counties of GNRC's footprint, as well as the addition of 4 counties to our east. Murray County, we do serve as that county's MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, so we are often working with them. But Smith, Cannon, and Macon County on our eastern side are the additional MSA counties that we are pulling into this planning initiative. But again, TDEC is doing a statewide planning effort that covers the entire state, and then Knoxville and Memphis are doing ones for the MSA. So the entire state of Tennessee will be covered by a CPRG planning initiative. So today's agenda, just going to provide a brief overview on air pollution and emissions, some of the data trends that we were seeing in the Middle Tennessee region, talk about some of the benefits that we can anticipate by reducing emissions and what those actions could be, and then providing an overall, a brief overview of the emissions reduction planning effort and next steps, and then we'll reserve time at the end for some Q&A. So just to get everybody kind of used to Poll EV, just would like you to tell us where your home is by dropping a pin on the map. So it should be live and ready for you to show us where you're joining from. So I'll pause for a minute. And if you aren't able to use poll EV, feel free to type into the chat feature as well, where that's available. All right. Responses are coming in, so good. It's working. So it looks like some Franklin, lots of Nashville area. So good. Yay. It's always nice when technology works. All right. Well, we'll give just a few more seconds. I know if some of you had to pull it up a little bit late. All right. Now that you've got the hang of it, we're going to ask another question. Um, so just really want to understand what you hope to learn or hear in this presentation. And again, if you don't have poll EV up, feel free to drop a comment in the chat. And I hope that during this process or during the presentation, we answer the majority of your questions or what you hope to hear. But if not, be sure to type the question in the chat, or we'll try to remember and cover that at the end. All right, so learning more about the data and how it's collected and how Nashville contributes to the emissions, knowing how we can help. I always appreciate that. And then just curiosity about the plans and the goals. All right, and target areas. Give it a few more minutes to come in. All right, well, we'll keep going. So we're gonna move into the presentation section of the agenda or of the presentation. But before I do, just want to do a quick reminder. We do have two upcoming in-person events next week on Tuesday, the 27th in the evening at the Hadley Park Community Center, and also on Wednesday evening at the Southeast Community Center here in the north and south areas of Nashville. So we really hope if you're able to join us, you do come out. We'll be presenting a lot of what you learn and hear about today, but also some additional materials and activities to get your input and feedback on. So really look forward to the conversation today, but also if you're able to join us in person, we would love to have you. So with that, I will turn it over to Maddie, and she's going to walk through just a brief 101 on air pollution, greenhouse gases, and emissions. So Maddie.
All right. Hello, everybody. Like Jessica just said, I am going to get us started with some air pollution, greenhouse gases, and emissions. Just a brief overview to kind of contextualize the rest of our conversation today, so that everybody has the same vocab moving forward. Awesome. So this slide is a brief overview of some of the common air pollutants that we can see, well, maybe not, maybe see is the wrong word, but that are found in the atmosphere. If we go through them, we have carbon monoxide. A lot of us are familiar with that and hear stories about it, but it's a gas generated by incomplete combustion of fuels, a lot of times from vehicles, and it can react with other chemicals and gases to produce ozone. We also have sulfur dioxide, which we see a lot in smog, and is created by the burning of fossil fuels to generate electricity. Particulate matter is a smaller class and kind of involves a lot of other different types of particles that are lump summed into that one category, but it is often composed of a large number of different components and gases. Some of those are directly emitted, so they come from a given source, but then other ones are caused by reactions in the atmosphere as different compounds come into contact with one another. And then some other ones that we have on the screen are nitrogen oxides and methane and volatile organic compounds. Like I mentioned previously, some pollutants are released directly into the atmosphere, while others are formed in the air from chemical reactions. For example, ground level ozone forms when chemical NOx or the nitrogen oxides and VOCs react in the presence of sunlight. And so air pollution is having this major impact on human health and the environment through different pathways. Moving forward into greenhouse gases are gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. They act really similar to the glass in a greenhouse where you would keep your plants. So we see the sun kind of filtering through the glass, and then it gets trapped in this glass structure, and the plants are able to stay nice and warm, and there's a nice level of humidity, all that good stuff. The same thing goes for our atmosphere. Greenhouse gases absorb the sun's energy and the heat that is radiated back from the Earth's surface and trap it in the atmosphere and prevent it from going out into space, which in some ways works really well for us because it allows the Earth to maintain a nice livable temperature for humans and for a lot of the organisms and creatures that live on Earth. However, in recent centuries and in recent years, as development and human activity has increased, the amount of greenhouse gases that are being released into the atmosphere have steadily ticked upwards, which over time has caused the Earth to get warmer and to kind of exemplify that greenhouse gas effect. And carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that we see pretty commonly. If you look at the pie chart that we have on the slide, it makes up 79.4% of our greenhouse gases, which is quite a lot. And like we say on the slide as well, each greenhouse gas's effect on the climate depends primarily on three factors. The first is concentration of the gas in the atmosphere. The second is length of time that the gases remain in the atmosphere. So different gases have different lifespans, which can contribute to the way that they impact our atmosphere long term. And then we also have the impact of the gases on the atmosphere. So some of them are a lot more intense than others. Like black carbon is very dangerous and very influential in a negative way and would have a different impact than a lesser greenhouse gas in that way. All right, and now we can take a quick look at this national example of greenhouse gases and emissions at the entire country's level of the United States. So this graphic is pulled from data taken in 2021, and it represents, again, we see carbon dioxide having a huge share of the overall greenhouse gas emissions, but it also introduces something that we haven't talked about yet, but that we will continue revisiting, which is identifying emissions based on their source economic sector. So if you look, you can see that there are different icons. One is for transportation, one is for electric power, there are ones for industry, agriculture, and then commercial and residential buildings. And they are each identified with a corresponding percentage. For example, transportation has a 29%. What that means is that the transportation economic sector, so vehicles, think the cars that we drive around in, or the bus that you might take to get downtown for a concert, or even a boat if you go out on the lake during the summer, like my family does. All of those sources are grouped in the transportation sector and contribute to 29% of overall emissions that are captured in this diagram. Same goes for electric power. We see 25%, which means that 25% of the emissions are coming from the electric power, which makes sense when you think about the fact that electricity is all around us. My laptop is plugged into the wall right now. My phone is in my pocket. The lights are on. I'm connected to probably a lot of different like Wi-Fi's and servers that I'm not aware of. And it's all around us. So we see those emissions and the sectors that they take up. Industry represents manufactured goods and industrial processes, and those emissions are captured in the industry sector. And then we also have agriculture, commercial, and residential buildings, which follow the same sort of pathway and are lesser sources, but still important in terms of thinking about emissions reductions. All right, so now we've talked about some of the broader data and what's happening in terms of air pollutants. What are air pollutants, and what's happening at the national level? But this is where we get to kind of deep dive into what's happening in Middle Tennessee. And we're going to start that with this brief example of what a greenhouse gas inventory could look like. I think this is a good example because it exemplifies some of the main components of a greenhouse gas inventory and is also from Tennessee, which is where we're from. A greenhouse gas inventory is a historical accounting of the amount of greenhouse gases emitted to or sequestered / removed from the atmosphere over a given amount of time. And it includes all of the various activities across the economy. So all of those items, it seems like a lot, but they're all represented here. We have a historical amount of time, which is 1990 to 2021. We have greenhouse gases, which are the different layers shown in the chart. And then we also have them divided out by economic sectors. So we see transportation, commercial energy, electric power industry, agriculture, industry, and residential. And much like the national data that we just took a look at, transportation, again, is a very big sector, very prominent in this graph. And we also see electric power coming in as very prominent in a very big sector. And this kind of gives a nice foreshadowing to our Middle Tennessee region draft inventory. So this has been the draft inventory that myself and then my other coworker, Caroline, she couldn't be here today, but we have both been working on this for quite a while. It is our pride and joy. But one thing to note as we look through it is that it is still very much a draft. So to start things off, our Middle Tennessee greenhouse gas inventory, draft inventory, has a baseline year of 2019, which means that we are assessing data. We're looking at emissions just from the year 2019, from the whole year, but just that year, not from like 2019 to 2023, just 2019. Another thing that is pretty clear from the get-go is that transportation is our biggest emitting sector. Again, this aligns pretty nicely with the trends that we've seen so far at the state and at the national level. And then that is really closely followed by electricity generation. And then the third highest source of emissions, which kind of trails a little bit behind, but is commercial and residential building uses. And those top three sectors account for 90% of total emissions, which is a lot. And I think there are three main things to note with our draft inventory. The first one is that this is a pretty high level inventory. As part of the CPRG program, we're going to be producing a more in-depth, more fully fleshed out inventory in about 1.5 years that's going to have a lot more niche, highly specific data than this one does. What we did primarily for this inventory, I know that there was a question about how we sourced our data and where we got it from. And it kind of varies based on the sector. So some of the sectors are pretty highly localized and specific. For example, solid waste. GNRC does a lot of solid waste work. So we have, the tonnage from landfills in our region, and we were able to put that into our software and use the specific tonnage that we got from each of the landfills to get the solid waste emissions. But for things like grid electricity, we used national data sets and national data that's available at the county level. And so while it's still pretty specific, we are covering 17 counties with our geography. So we had 17 counties worth of data. It's not as specific as maybe we spoke to X company and found out that they produced Y amount of emissions, and now we're plugging that into our inventory. So I think that is one thing to note. The second thing to note is that if you all are familiar with TVERS or with the Tennessee Volunteer Emissions Reduction Strategy, Their inventory looks a little bit different than ours in that they have a category for waste and wastewater, whereas we do not. We weren't able to get that data in the short amount of timeline that we had. So ours looks a little bit different than theirs does. And I think the third thing to note is with industrial energy, our industrial energy doesn't take into account right now coal because the software that we're using had a little bit of a bug and we weren't able to select coal as the fuel type. So any industrial emissions from the use of coal as a fuel source has not yet been input into our inventory. And I think those are the primary three caveats that I have to give you. Awesome. Okay, so one thing that we wanted to take a closer look at as we kind of go through our inventory are the CO2e emissions from transportation mobile sources, because it makes up such a big portion of our emissions. One moment. Jessica, this is an aside to you. So sorry, but my computer is not charging. So if I just stop talking, it's not on purpose. My charger is just not working with me.
Okay. If I
But
see you disappear, I will pick it up.
it is not on purpose. But like I said, we wanted to kind of spot check transportation since it's such a huge, it has such a huge impact on our regional emissions. And one thing that you'll see here is that 90% of the transportation emissions come from on-road vehicles. So like I mentioned, these are personal vehicles. It's the car that I take to work and that a lot of my coworkers take to work or that other individuals take to work. The good thing is that there have been major improvements in EVs and in infrastructure and deployment, which helps make transportation a good category and a good sector to focus on for emissions reductions, because there are a lot of catalysts that are existing and technologies that are improving that kind of incentivize a reduction in transportation emissions, whether that's through vehicles that can be charged or whether it is through increasing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure or increasing public service routes. All of those things are really helpful in trying to minimize as much as possible that on-road CO2e amount. And yeah. All right, so now we are going to move into some benefits of reducing emissions. We have talked over what air pollutants and what emissions are. We have talked over what they look like specifically for Middle Tennessee, but also what they look like for the state of Tennessee and what they look like for our region as a whole. And now we can say, why does this matter? Why are we reducing emissions? What's the point of this all? So the first is reducing environmental impacts, specifically negative environmental impacts. Air pollution has pretty severe environmental impacts, as is demonstrated by this picture that was taken from North Carolina. So here we see a picture from 2005 and one from 2020, and there's a vast difference in the visible air quality taken just 15 years apart. And that's one thing to really keep in mind. There are huge environmental impacts that come with air quality. The environment is great as it is in terms of being able to being able to produce carbon sinks and sink carbon, but negative environmental impacts. Sorry, there was a minor interruption. But air pollution can really negatively impact the environment and the species that are in it. Like I mentioned previously, greenhouse gases contribute to increasing global warming, which has a huge impact on the ability of species to survive, but also on things like, the poles that we hear a lot about and melting ice caps and all of that good stuff. So reducing air pollution in turn, kind of the long way around, also reduces those negative environmental impacts that we see. Another thing that is really important is public health. The CPRG program is a Justice 40 initiative, which means that it really focuses on benefiting low income or disadvantaged communities. And a lot of times we will see environmental injustices centered in those communities, or we will see, disproportionate health impacts in communities of older adults or of children or pregnant women. And those public health concerns can come about in things like cancer or in heart disease, respiratory diseases. I have family members with asthma who are definitely impacted by this, diabetes, things like that. And reducing air pollution and greenhouse gases in turn helps reduce those negative health impacts that come with pollution and living in an area of pollution. And then another thing that benefits from a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is technologies and cleaner technologies. I mentioned briefly before that EVs are becoming, increasingly more adopted and more popular. I see them a lot more now than I used to even 5 years ago. And that is an example of a clean technology in a way that our economy and our society has kind of adapted to integrate newer, cleaner technologies into our way of life. And if that's possible for something like a vehicle that we use day to day, it also extends into other things. Like Jessica and I were talking earlier this morning about paints and finding ways to create a paint that has less harmful chemicals in it. I think she was talking about VOCs. So a VOC-free paint. Something as simple as that can have drastic environmental impacts when adopted at a wider scale. And so not only does it increase innovation and technological savvy and like offer a cool economic possible benefit, but it's also helping to reduce the negative impacts of greenhouse gas emissions. So all in all, it's a great thing.
All right. Thank you, Maddie. You made it. Your computer made it.
Yes, by a thread.
All right. Well, now we're going to turn to, and thanks, Maddie, for providing an overview on greenhouse gases and emissions, and also their impacts and what we have found so far doing the Middle Tennessee inventory. So now we're going to turn to another component of the requirements for the emissions reduction plan, which is identifying ways or actions that we can reduce our emissions. And a lot of those are at different scales. So there are ones that can, be undertaken by individuals at neighborhood levels, community levels, city and county, and then statewide. And so this is a good kind of high-level overview of a couple of actions that individuals or communities and cities can undertake to reduce our emissions. So recycling and composting, keeping that methane from occurring from landfills by diverting our compost materials, organic materials, recycling or reusing a lot of our materials or equipment that doesn't need or still has a life left in it, or for other uses. We can also change the way that we commute. Choosing to ride the bus one day each week, or walking and biking to get groceries or go to local stores can also have an impact by reducing those single occupancy vehicle trips and emissions occurring from those vehicles. We can also choose as we replace our older appliances in our homes or in businesses, choosing energy efficient light bulbs, appliances, and other electronics. I have a push mower, so I'm probably one of a few that creates no emissions when I mow my yard. It's a nice workout. But there are other opportunities for reducing those non-road emissions. So thinking construction equipment, but also all the way down to that individual lawnmower and the small engines that we have. We can also plant more trees and protect the existing forest that we have. those reduce emissions and can act as those carbon sinks to pull emissions from the atmosphere. And then renewable energy, making sure that some of our sources that we're providing all that electricity to power our homes and businesses and some of our cars and vehicles has the ability or comes from a renewable source like the sun or wind and water. So there are some options that are, scalable from an individual actions that we can take all the way up to city and county level. And then statewide, we know a lot of this infrastructure is going to be a requirement from city county perspective and from a state perspective, and other lots of agencies and organizations. So some of these, you know, your ability to make individual choices will be impacted by our government's ability to provide those investments and services. So, gonna transition to another poll question. So, again, pull up your phone or your extra tab, but would just like to hear, what are you doing already to reduce your emissions? It could be I bike to work every day, or I take the bus, or I ride the WeGo Star, or if you have a push mower like I do, I just would like to hear what you are already doing to reduce your emissions. And it could be composting. Yep, good. That one just combining trips. Yes, making sure that when you run to the grocery store, you're doing multiple trips all at once. So it's shortening or reducing the number of times you drive your car. All right, composting, recycle. Yes, drive electric. Donating clothing. Yep. I'm a big ThreadUp user, and I'm not advertising or telling you what you should use, but I do recycle and reuse clothing. Lots of composting. All right, walking, biking, carpool. Yep. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, give a few more seconds for final input. And it might be a very small action that you take, can have significant effects on emissions reduction. So the simple choices of walking or taking transit or doing small things like composting can, over a scale, can have significant impacts to reductions. All right. So now I know I saw a couple of I do nothing, all the way up to a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, but would like to hear what are the challenges for you to reduce emissions? It could be, there I don't have transit near my house, or transit doesn't go to where I need it to go. It doesn't go to my office, or it doesn't go to the stores that I need to shop at. It could be as simple as, these Energy Star appliances are often a lot more expensive. And so it could be a cost perspective or a challenge. It could be there's no composting nearby. And I know Metro Nashville has a pilot program going on right now. It could be as simple as I don't feel safe biking to work, but if it was safer, I would. So just would like to hear what makes it challenging. No recycling, lack of infrastructure, difficult to build. And some of our older homes, pre-1950s, don't have unless they've been remodeled, don't have a lot of like the insulation and R values that are in the newer homes that we build, more efficient windows and appliances. So Sometimes it's a constraint of a significant purchase that requires a lot of investment to be more efficient and reduce the emissions or the electricity used to heat and cool your homes. All right, lack of blueway. Don't own a, okay, so like access to a bicycle. Yep. Tree canopy. So tree canopy, is it the challenge is having a yard to plant a tree, or is it the development is bulldozing or converting those forest lands to impervious surface or buildings? Low tree canopy across Nashville. You live and work in a different county, so it's probably most likely having a transit system that provides that regional connections. All right. Well, feel free to continue to add in. I think it'll stay live, but if not, you can add in additional to the chat feature that we have. But I'm gonna move into what the this emissions planning process is gonna look like. Oh, never mind. I have one more question. I jumped the gun. So what do you think are the biggest challenges for your community? So like think city or county government to reduce emissions. Fighting the state. Lack of impact fees. Okay. So some of the public buy-in, okay, for to create that transit network. Public, so education, money, the cost. Yep. Importance of water. Okay, regional partnerships. So improving regional partnerships to tackle some of these more challenging issues or provide solutions. Rural support. Okay. So not just the metro urban areas. This is a statewide. Emissions are in the air and move around. We're all impacted by them. Lack of connections between sidewalk, bike, and transit. Putting more pressure on the companies and not just making it an individual's effort. The way that we develop, creating those low sprawl, like low density and sprawl out. Okay. Inefficient recycling and lack of transportation plan. Construction and growth is very high, fast paced. Yep. All right. Misperceptions about electric vehicles. Yeah, I think a lot of what we find is just public education and awareness is one of the biggest challenges to some of these initiatives or actions. All right. Well, I'm going to continue on, but feel free if you want to drop anything in the chat, or I think this will stay live until I hit the next question. So keep on adding in. So I'm going to move and shift to talking about planning for emissions in Middle Tennessee with the EPA CPRG planning funds that were the GNRC was the lead entity to receive those um, planning dollars. And I think the biggest takeaway, or if nothing else that you hear from me, is the upcoming deadline for implementation grant funds of over $4.6 billion. So again, is an EPA funded initiative through the Inflation Reduction Act. It provides funding to do two phases of the program. So there were the non-competitive planning grants, of which GNRC received the MSA, $1 million planning grant, and then the state with TDEC is the lead agency and received a $3 million funding grant. So this is the phase one planning grants. And the purpose is to develop a priority climate action plan that is due at the end of this month. And then over the next year and a half, develop a comprehensive priority climate action or comprehensive action climate action plan, which, as Maddie mentioned earlier, will take into account a more nuanced look at the emissions that we have in our region, not just rely solely on the national data sets, but also be sure that we capture that water and wastewater emissions, since we were not able to capture that in our this priority climate action plan that's due at the end of the month. And then phase two is the competitive implementation grants. Those are the strategies that are applied for must be included in this priority climate action plan in order for the applicants and the action to be eligible for that $4.3 billion. So moving into what are we, what is EPA's goal? What's their objective, and why did they do put out this money to states and MSAs, the top 67 MSAs? So their objectives are really to tackle climate pollution while supporting good jobs and lowering energy costs for families. So again, like that, those energy efficiency measures that you can implement, and accelerating work to address these environmental injustices and empower community-driven solutions in these neighborhoods that might have overburdened on air emissions. So thinking about the um, neighborhoods and communities that might be right next to an interstate or across from like a rail switching yard, or the airport. So a lot of places that might have high emissions that as for those communities. And then delivering cleaner air by reducing air pollution is of course, the number one probably objective of the EPA with the air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. So again, I know I've mentioned this a few times, but just to give you an overview of um, who are the recipients in the state of Tennessee. So again, the state of Tennessee received $3 billion, and TDEC is leading that initiative with the Tennessee Volunteer Emissions Reduction Strategy. And then Nashville MSA, we are the lead agency, and then Memphis and Knoxville are doing their planning grants, are leading their planning grants, the cities are. And then the Chattanooga was not in the top 67 MSAs and did not receive a direct allocation from the non-competitive grants, but they are incorporated and are very involved in the state, the TVERS grant. So again, just wanted to remind everybody what our planning region is. It's again the 13 counties of GNRC and the addition of the 4 MSA counties, so for a 17 county total Middle Tennessee region. But anything outside of these boundaries and even within our boundary are being covered underneath the statewide planning grant and plan. So our goals are identifying and implementing ambitious measures that will achieve significant cumulative greenhouse gas reductions by 2030 and beyond. Pursuing measures that will achieve substantial community benefits, such as reducing those criteria air pollutants, particularly for those low income and disadvantaged communities. And then being sure that we complement other funding sources to maximize reductions in community benefits. So thinking about any transportation dollars that are already out there, any public health initiatives and funding. So making sure that we identify multiple funding sources to achieve the maximum benefits. And then identifying initiatives or actions that can be scaled up and that can be shared across jurisdictions. So knowing what will work well somewhere is a good start for other places to see how it's been done and how it can be modified and adapted to another community. So looking at our regional priorities for emission reductions, focusing again on transportation because it is our highest emission sector at that 43%. These are a few of the emission reduction actions that have drafted for the delivery of our planning or our plan at the end of the month. So increasing cleaner on-road and off-road mobile sources, and making sure that it's mobile sources and not just vehicles, because we don't want to exclude those, the small engines like gas-powered lawnmowers, and off-road diesel equipment. Improving the efficiency of the transportation system with technology investment. So thinking about ways to reduce idling in downtown Nashville when you're stopped at a light and you hit everyone at one after another, and making that system more efficient to reduce the idling of the vehicles on the network. Reducing travel demand and improving bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to encourage those alternative behaviors and choices. So which goes right to promoting travel alternatives and improving the transit system and infrastructure. So a lot of what your comments were earlier were around the missing connections or lack of access to transit, but also that safe ability to walk or bike where you would like to go. So again, these are our draft priorities for emissions reductions from mobile sources or that transportation sector. And then looking at other priorities for a couple of the other sectors, so investing in renewable energy. So solar is primarily most likely in the state of Tennessee. Investing in building energy efficiency and weatherization, so helping homeowners and business owners to improve the R values, so the insulation and the operations, I guess, of the building materials, to reduce, again, it helps to reduce the emissions, the electricity that is used to heat and cool those buildings, but also looking at ways to potentially improve or increase the use of energy efficient and energy smart appliances and technology like LED light bulbs. So invest, and then the second or third one in this category is investing in landfill gas recovery. Landfills emit methane, and so being sure that we capture that gas and either burn it cleanly, or looking at opportunities to capture and reuse or invest or put it back into the energy distribution system through conversion. So, and then investing in, again, to reduce the landfill methane or the methane that is coming from landfills, investing in ways to divert waste and do more sustainable materials management, such as composting, reuse, and recycling. And then finally, I know what this is a big topic for a lot of folks is protecting, increasing our tree canopy in the region, whether it be by loss of development or through some of the significant storms and tornadoes that we've had over the last couple years, and reducing or increasing that tree canopy. So now I'm going to ask you two more questions, and then I'm sorry, we'll stay on and answer as many questions as we can. But would like to see or hear from you on how we should prioritize these regional initiatives for emissions reduction. So each of the initiatives that I went through are on this list for you to rank order, and you should be able to drag and drop them as needed. And Ed, I know you've been typing in the chat, so feel free to type in your top three or add additional ones. So we'll give folks a few minutes to do this activity. And I know there are lots of other ways to reduce emissions. Again, this is our priority climate action plan. And so in the comprehensive action plan, there will be a lot more emissions reduction measures that will be listed. Our intent is to make sure that we cover projects and initiatives that we are aware of that currently exist or are being thought of by our agency, but other agencies and government bodies in Middle Tennessee that might desire or want to apply for one of those implementation grants. All right, so we're getting a few. So on transition to cleaner on-road and off-road mobile sources, improving transit systems, invest in waste diversion and landfill improvements are the top three right now. Yep, transit just bumped up. It's so fun to see it. Investing in renewable energy. Yep. And again, if you have a question that you want to ask us at the end when we finish, you can go ahead and type it in the chat. That way we can see it and we'll get to it as quickly as we can. All right, I'll give about 30 more seconds and then I'm gonna move us to the next question. I feel like I should put the do 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 song on. All right, I'm gonna move us to the next question, but feel free to reach out to Maddie and myself. We will be doing a similar activity at the in-person event, so don't worry, we will get your input. We want to make sure we hear it and take and make adjustments as we need to for the planned delivery. So I know that was our list. So you might have other actions, so like projects, policies, or programs that you would like your community, so city or county, to undertake that helps reduce emissions. So feel free if you have another idea that you'd like us to consider moving forward, please type it in or type it into the chat. We'd love to hear ideas. We are open to, we know that we are not always 100% of the experts in this field, and we would appreciate any input that you might have, or as a affected community resident, or even if you are an expert and you are know everything to know about air pollution and greenhouse gases. And if nobody responds, I'll be disappointed because I know we did not capture everything. All right, better solar incentives. Revisit thermal to reduce waste and create energy. And I thought I had made this into a list. I don't know why it's popping up as a word cloud. I apologize. Increase weekly pickup, reduce consumption, incentivize technologies, energy efficiency. All right, well, I'm going to move us into a reminder again. We will be meeting in person at the Hadley Park Community Center on Tuesday evening, and then the Southeast Community Center on Wednesday evening. So we hope you can join us at these in-person events and share additional thoughts, comments, feedback. But of course, we're open if you would like to email myself or Maddie with additional questions or comments or ideas and suggestions. Please feel free to do so. But with that, we've only got 5 minutes, but we'll stay on as long as people have questions. So now is the time. If you would like to ask a question, you may type it into the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, and then we'll call on you. So we'll just pause. And Maddie, did any questions come into the chat while we were going? No? Okay. We had a question about what will be required of property owners, especially office buildings. This plan will not require anything. There's no, we are not specifying or drafting a emissions reduction measure that would make a requirement of an emissions reduction, if that makes sense. So these will all be voluntary, similar to the Tennessee TVERS, Tennessee Voluntary Emissions Reduction Strategy. Um, so I think that answered Ed's question from earlier. All right, well, it doesn't seem like we have many questions. So with that, I will wrap up and just say thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure. Um, and I know Maddie and I and Caroline have really enjoyed working on this project for the Middle Tennessee region and alongside TDEC and staff to develop these plans. We really look forward to digging deeper into the comprehensive emission reduction plans over the next year and a half, which will provide additional opportunities for public input and stakeholder input. So Carson, can you explore more smart city investments as a reduction strategy? Great point. Yes, we can. And we can dig into that during the comprehensive action plan. But if you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to follow up with myself or Maddie. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you at one of next week's meetings in person. Bye, everybody.